I am going to talk to you today about my experience working at Lululemon. If you can believe it, this was a Lululemon employee. In part, want to make this video because I'm definitely not the typical employee. I don't have that Lululemon kind of ethos. I'm not really into fitness. I do have a yoga practice, but it's definitely not in the ethos of the Lululemon kind of understanding of yoga, which is a whole other subject. But I hope this is helpful or interesting if you're thinking about working at Lululemon. I'm kind of going to give you all the tea on that if you're just interested, because I feel like it's one of those brands that has this sort of cult following and all this mysticism around it, and can be somewhat culty even, I think, like as an experience of employment, if that makes sense. Let's just get into it, shall we? So, first of all, my experience as an employee. I worked at Lululemon starting in November 2021. I was hired as part of the holiday hiring spree that goes on every year. And I actually really did want to work at Lululemon specifically. And honestly, a lot of it was because of the sort of lack of dress code. It's kind of a funny story. I had actually been hired to work at Blue Bottle, and I was going to be a barista because I really love coffee. And even I was looking for a job at this point, a part-time job, something kind of like laid back and easy, A, to make money, B, to get back into the working world, because I hadn't worked at all in any kind of employment for almost 2 years at this point. And so I wanted to kind of get my feet wet. I was overqualified for this kind of thing. I mean, I've gone to college, I've had a whole career. But I was looking for something, in that realm. I thought I was going to be a barista. Blue Bottle has the strictest dress code. First of all, you can't even wear nail polish, which is wild to me. I understand that if you're working in like a restaurant or something, but you're really like not doing stuff like that at Blue Bottle. So anyway, but that was a big part of the reason. That wasn't the only reason. There was also a bunch of like bullshit already going on with management and all this stuff, and I hadn't even started working there, and so I was like, yeah, I'm out. And so then I needed to find something else, and I wanted to find something that would have a lack of dress code, honestly. And in parts because the way I dress is such a big part of my identity. And it's really important to me, honestly, to be able to express myself through clothing. And also at the time, especially, this is changing a little bit now, but I would wear leggings like every day though. And a lot of places have like anti-legging policies in particular. And I struggled to, I guess, wrap my head around the fact that I'd have to change like literally half of my entire wardrobe probably in order to work somewhere, and then also like the cost of like buying like real pants, and I don't know, and I just didn't want to do it basically. And pretty much all my leggings are Lululemon. Lululemon does have the best leggings, I will say. I've tried all of them. And in the past, I was really into fitness, and I was more of like the Lululemon girl. And I had a ton of clothing, I guess, also like from those days. And so I decided to try to work there. And the way that the Lululemon interview process is structured, first you do a group interview, which they were taking place on Zoom. I feel like they still do. I can't tell you for sure, honestly, but I hope they do. But at least at this point, they were happening over Zoom. And basically, it was some kind of assistant manager, and then I would say how many it was a decent number. I would say there was probably 6 or 7 of us in the group interview. And so the group interviews, if you've ever done them, I think you can probably relate. They're extremely stressful. It's a thing too where it's like you have to differentiate yourself from what other people are saying and have a complete response, but not talk too long because you have to get to everybody. And it's, I think I find it very difficult and not enjoyable whatsoever. And, but anyway, so you do a group interview, and then basically they decide from there who they're going to invite to do individual interviews. First time after I did a group interview, I got a rejection email, and I actually decided to keep applying though because there were tons of openings at stores in the New York City area. There's tons of Lululemon stores in this area, so I was like, why don't I just apply to some others? And so I applied, and I was able to get another group interview for a different store. But I actually also got rejected from that store. I don't even remember which stores they were at this point. And then I decided to give it one more shot, and I got another group interview. And the funniest part about it though was, and it was like a Saturday afternoon. I show up in the Zoom, and actually I was the only one who, because you get a couple different time options when you're selected for a group interview, and I was the only one who had selected that time, and so it actually was an individual interview. Because and I think that worked in my favor, honestly. Well, it didn't, because clearly the first two times I didn't do well, and but it was the same format, I guess, and structure, and I was still following that same thing, and I still had the same time limitations and stuff, but I didn't have to compete with anybody else, and obviously there was a lot more attention and consideration for me because it was just me in this interview, and I could tell that I think it was the assistant manager really liked me. This was the Upper West Side store, and I got offered an individual interview, and then basically the individual interviews also happened on Zoom, and then after that interview, I was told like it would be a really quick turnaround decision, and if it was a yes, then I would be going to the store and meeting with her and the store manager for like a final interview, basically. And so I ended up doing that, and I thought it went really well. I was nervous though, I guess. I was nervous and I know that they even told me like they were interviewing a few other people, so I wasn't sure if we were all competing for one job or what the situation was. But and some time went by, and then I got an email basically saying that they didn't want to hire, like, I guess they didn't need me at that store, and so they were sort of like passing me to a completely different store, which was at Brookfield Place, which is in the financial district. It's kind of like the border of Tribeca and financial district, so like way different part of Manhattan. And yeah, it was kind of a weird thing. But I wasn't like hired at that store. It was like there was sort of like a final interview that I was going to have to do. And so I did this final interview, which essentially was not intensive at all. And I think it was more just because that store manager was going to have to extend an offer to me, and because that person like hires for that particular store, and that person was new, actually, as the store manager. Like, she had just started, although she'd worked for the company for like a decade. But and there was a whole thing because at the time, apparently, like, my availability wasn't quite in the required amount. And I guess, I don't know if it was an oversight or like what the issue was, but nobody had picked up on it until now. But then she was so nice, and she was like, let me see what I can do for you. And I could tell she really like liked me and like, wanted to make it work. And I really appreciated that, and was able to, I guess, figure that out. Gave me an offer. And then I, was basically just off to the races from there. And I was actually, my first day working in the store was on Black Friday of all days. Although I was kind of excited for it, and I felt like it would be a good day to just get my feet wet and really see what an intense pace is like. And there was very low pressure because, it was my first day, so I couldn't really be like expected to know anything. And so it was good. It was a little chaotic. I remember I mean, I think the biggest adjustment for me was just the intensive labor that a job like that requires. It's you're on your feet. It's basically the kind of job where, you literally can't sit down or else you'll get yelled at, and not that there's anywhere to sit anyway. And um you're on your feet, you're um climbing on ladders constantly, you're lifting heavy boxes, you're going here and there looking for inventory, like you're even interacting with customers, doing all kinds of stuff. And I think the physical demand of it was just overwhelming. And being on my feet for like 6 hours with one 15-minute break just felt like death, basically. And I think, I've grown a lot, and there's a lot of, I guess, different understanding in a way that I have now than I did at that point. But also socially, I felt like it was a lot. And I mean, I think would feel like that, but um, I which ended up kind of being part of my journey there, because I am autistic. And I I mean, there were a lot of things where, like, it was difficult, and I think learning it was hard. And then, but a lot of times, once I kind of can establish my routines, and once I can set up systems for myself, I'm fine, and like I'm good. I remember just how tiring it was physically, especially the first day. Like, I was exhausted afterwards. And however, I would say, like, the coworkers and the people who worked there were super welcoming, really nice. Everything I'd read on Glassdoor, everything I'd ever heard about working at Lululemon being cliquey, being like sort of a toxic work environment with, like, kind of like a mean girls kind of a thing, right? I did not experience that, like, at all, really. I had maybe like there was like one person in particular who didn't even work there for that long while I was working there, but who I didn't really like. Although, I mean, we didn't have an issue or anything, I just didn't particularly like her. um but really, like, I was honestly surprised at how amazing the actual, like, work environment was, like being on the floor, like working with the other people. The best of Lululemon is, like, educators, or what they call basically the sales associates, just kind of the regular people who just sort of work at the store, right? And then there are key leaders who are sort of actually manage the shifts. So they manage all of the educators. They do kind of like some higher level tasks. You're basically like in charge, so to speak. And then above them are the assistant managers, and then the store manager. So it's not even like there's not that many tiers of the structure. It's pretty simple, honestly. But the key leaders were also all really great. And the same thing, I think the only, like, drama or, some of the said clickiness or, like, bullshit kind of came from the management, honestly. There was tons of drama within the management, even like above just our store, but like the region and all that. Like, there was tons of drama kind of within that, permeating within that. And I felt like the higher you sort of rose in the ranks, the more drama you would have to put up with. That's what it seemed like to me. That definitely was the biggest sort of thorn in my side. I think even the entire experience, the management was very inconsistent. There's definitely favoritism that goes on in that sense, as far as hiring, promoting, things like that. Definitely that is real. And I feel like that's a part of the Lululemon culture that is very much like, and there's, I think also one of the biggest critiques that I have is that there's a lot of this faux diversity that goes on too. And I had a lot of conversations with people who worked there at the time even about this, because Lululemon has as of, I think, around the point in 2020 when Black Lives Matter sort of resurged, committed to more diverse hiring practices. And if you go into Lululemon, I can almost guarantee you're going to see a pretty good diverse mix as far as like racial representation and things like that. Um, and maybe not in the past, but however, a lot of it is just sort of tokenism and lip service. And also, there's a lot of issues actually with the diversity, like throughout the structure, because there's a lot of like educators and people at the bottom who are people of color, who are women of color. Even just like there's overrepresentation just of men in the leadership, in the management, compared to the amount of women who work there. Because most of the actual men who are employed, who are also mostly white men, are managers, or key leaders at the very least, for the most part, but overrepresented. And so I definitely encountered that, and there was not equity, essentially. There was not equity, definitely just a recreation of these different hierarchies and, you know, colonialist structures and patriarchal structures. And I know a lot of people I worked with kind of experienced different forms of racism. And yeah, so that is something I think to be aware of and that I found to be frustrating. Because, again, they give it all this lip service and they constantly will pat themselves on the back for their diversity efforts. But, is it really diversity? That's questionable. I think even for me, like, I actually am a diversity hire in the sense that I am disabled. And so, which they didn't know when hiring me, but I am a diversity hire. I do think with that, because actually at one point, one of the very few negative experiences I mentioned that I had that happened with management was something where it came from basically what I was talking about with the fine motor skills and sort of being chastised also like in front of other staff, which I felt like, well, A, was very embarrassing, B, was highly inappropriate. And I actually was considering quitting because of just like how egregious this whole situation was. But part of me also wanted to test the waters and just like have experience filing like ADA accommodations or asking for ADA accommodations and that whole process, because it was something that I had encountered before and in previous jobs, like different roadblocks, and just not done anything and not even really known what to do. And so I wanted to get some experience actually doing it. And so I did. And honestly, well, the management and that was very, at least to my face, they were very understanding. They were very supportive. And I actually was surprised at how supportive I felt like they were. ADA process, which is more of a thing that is just like part of the bullshit corporate hierarchy. The whole process of that was just ridiculous. And it was mostly ridiculous because it literally took like 4 months for them to actually approve my accommodations. Now, again, the management was actually decent in that they implemented a lot of the accommodations just as like an informality, because they're not actually like real until you get like approval, and there's like a whole process, and you have to get like a whole thing from like a clinician, and again, it's a whole process, and the burden is really on you, and it's a whole problem even. But that's not something specific to Lululemon though. That's just the world we live in, the society we live in, the politics that govern our processes of employment, right? So it's not really something I'm criticizing them for either way, but definitely it was bullshit as far as that goes. And even like, what if I needed the accommodations? Really I did, like, immediately. And then I have to wait 4 months to even get approval. And then, what are you supposed to do for 4 months? Because again, they were like decent people. And so they actually implemented most of it informally. And so it wasn't really like the issues sort of took care of themselves, if that makes sense. But they didn't have to do that. And if I had encountered a different manager, like perhaps that wouldn't have happened. And so that is definitely something that it is an issue, and even was an issue in that, like, I didn't have the formal like protections until basically I was almost done working there. I ended up being in this apartment fire in early June, and it just totally rocked my world in every possible way. And kind of just as a result of that and the housing insecurity that I was facing, it just wasn't going to work for me to work there anymore. It wasn't going to work for me to work there anymore. And I had also gotten hired in another position related to my graduate studies. And so I ended up departing from Lululemon at that point. Overall, though, and I don't even know like how helpful this was, and maybe I could do something like more specific, but it was a good experience. I think especially for like retail and for what it is. It could have been a lot worse. A lot of the scheduling and things like that was also annoying. They scheduled out, they would say it was 2 weeks, but it was really a week and a half out. And so yeah, just the whole thing of not knowing when you're working, it being really hard to like make plans or book appointments and things like that. That was definitely always a thing. They were really good though about calling out, honestly. Like I'm honestly surprised just how much you can get away with, at least in my store. Because I definitely called out like a fair amount, and I was shocked at how it wasn't really like taken on as much of an issue. I didn't get, written up. I didn't get X, Y, and Z for it. And Lululemon is kind of weird in that sense where they have a lot of policies, but the policies are written in this way that's like ambiguous and kind of vague, which I think leads to a lot of the favoritism or enables the favoritism. But they don't have specific rules of like, if you call out, 3 times, you're automatically fired or something like that. Like, it's just very much like calling out is not cool. Don't do it. It's against our policy. Okay. That like, not really like specifics about like consequences, what that means, which is a little confusing and can be frustrating, but honestly, it seems like you can get away with a lot. So don't tell anybody I told you, but that's really it. I don't know. Like, I mean, I felt like so many of the things they did were very hypocritical and sort of like this white appropriation of yoga, philosophy and principles of yoga. Yeah, I mean, I think unequivocally, I mean, the company is like by definition appropriative. So there's that. And I think a lot of the things they do are very much like, our culture is amazing. We value diversity. We're so ethical. Look how amazing we are, when a lot of that is smoke and mirrors. It's just like any other company, really. It's like not necessarily better or worse, but most of those companies are really egregious. And the pay is horrible. There's a lack of benefits, all of that. But then there's supposed to be a health and wellness company, right? So anyway, hopefully this was interesting and I had fun making it, at least. You have a great rest of your day whenever you're watching this, and I'll see you later.